watching this grasshopper, and there's something about, I don't know, the maybe meditative nature, or like I start to get the feeling like, is your porch a special place to you? Are you a guy who knows his porch well? Like,
So
is that like your space?
at my current apartment, I don't have one because I live in this tiny little thing in Pennsylvania right now.
We need more music from the porch.
I know. Well, that was when I wrote that song. I was renting a room from my friends in Madison, Wisconsin, and there was a great back porch there. And I would on nice days I would take the harp out and sit on the porch and play for a while. And so literally it was like the end of summer. It was starting to get a little bit cool, but I'm kind of, I'm a warm guy, so I'll hang out outside as long as I can. And there was like this one grasshopper that just landed on the porch and was hanging around by the bottom of the harp while I was playing. And it was probably one of the last ones of the season. And it was really that thought of like, the summer's ending. This is like, might be the last grasshopper alive in town. He probably wasn't, but it felt that way because it's the only one I'd seen for a while. And so it kind of goes with that, like, oh, this poor little grasshopper's hanging out here just listening to me play music. And he'll probably, winter's coming for him, and that's probably the end of it for him. And there was a little bit of like that kind of meditative summer's end type feeling to it. And I just started noodling around with these little E minor chord progressions and kind of this very, I don't know if you know Alan Stivell.
I don't.
He's a Breton harp player who kind of helped resurrect the folk harp in the 60s and 70s.
I am taking notes so I can educate myself.
Alan Stivell, look him up. You won't regret it. He's still around, still making music, but he really, kind of going off on a bit of an aside. Like the Celtic harp as we know it isn't really an ancient instrument in its current form.
Tell me about that.
A lot of people think of the harp as like, oh, it's just like they would have played in Brian Boru's throne room, in
totally right
1000. But the medieval and ancient Irish harps were still that basic triangle shape, but very different instruments. And then with the whole thing with colonization and all that, where the harps were kind of, and I'm not a historical expert, so I'm just kind of the musician's understanding of all this, not the historians.
Understood, yeah.
During colonization and stuff, they kind of suppressed the harp as an instrument because it was a national symbol and because it represented a lot of stuff that became sometimes actively repressed, although again, a real historian could tell you how much, and then also kind of unfashionable because it was an old-fashioned and very expensive instrument. So it kind of died out in Ireland for a while, and the folk harp died out in Europe for a while too, because in classical music you got the pedal harp that would play like fully chromatically and do all this and stuff. So that became the de facto harp. And so the folk harp was a little bit out of favor, but then like in the mid 20th century, a lot of traditional music started to get a bit of a revival, and a few people started resurrecting and redesigning and reinventing this kind of new harp design that drew on the traditional old style of harp, but incorporated some modern elements like nylon strings instead of metal or horsehair or something like that. These little flip levers to sharp the strings so you can play in different keys instead of being stuck in whatever key you tune the harp in, and stuff like that, and some construction techniques and all that. So in the 60s and 70s is when the kind of revival of the folk harp, and Alan Stivell was kind of at the forefront of that. So he but anyway, so he's been at it for a bit, and he also would like play these like traditional Breton and Celtic tunes with like a rock band and stuff, and play it like apparently like dance festivals in France.
Oh, very cool.
So so he also kind of pioneered the folk rock thing that was going on at the time. But anyway, some of his tunes, especially intros and outros of albums, had this very kind of wave-like feel to them, where you like kind of ripple up on the chords, and so it had that kind of same feel that Lonely Grasshopper had. And I was kind of playing around with that on the porch, and there was this poor little grasshopper, and that's the whole picture. Like back porch, the house. So my housemates had this lovely garden, but it was fall, or it's getting into the fall, and everything's kind of dying off, and I was sitting there playing around with the harp, and that's where that song got its beginnings.
I gotta say, if I had a housemate who showed up with a harp that they would sit on the porch and play live music for me in the evenings, I could open the window like that would cover the rent easily for me. That'd be nice.
It was a great place to sell. My housemates in Wisconsin, Ellie and Corey. Ellie is also a musician. She was my luthier. I would go to get like
cool,
my mandolin tune.
Very handy to have to have her that close.
She built and repaired all sorts of instruments. Her wife Corey used to work as an electrical engineer and was a genius with a soldering iron. So between the two of them, they could fix anything. uh, and also they could cook really well. So I was they rented out one room, uh, just basically to cover the property taxes, just give me kind of like also taking some strays, which was me at the time, and
Yeah.
so I had great housemates, and I had a great porch to play on,
Mhm.
renting this room from them, and occasionally we'd have little jams and stuff, and people over and play music. So it wasn't a bad couple years there.
Yeah. I love the sort of cartoonish or fairy tale depiction of grasshoppers and, crickets as, maybe having a little I just like to imagine that that little grasshopper maybe had a tiny fiddle back home that, they were
Maybe,
picking up your tune and they were gonna run back home and try to play it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm folktale-ish. I've always leaned a little bit more towards grasshopper than ant, much to my bank account's dismay. But
I think that's gotta be the tendency for most people who are musically
yeah,
inclined. Maybe that's why the grasshopper is fiddling all summer,
yeah,
Like, that's something that seems to go with the territory.
yeah, yeah.
My bank account can complain right alongside with yours.
Yep, yep.
Now the very next tune on the album, and I wonder if I should even try to pronounce, Regina's is this gonna be Kitharum or
Kitharum,
Sitharum? Oh, Kitharum, huh?
which is a which is a kind of Latinate word for a harp or a stringed lyre-like instrument.
Mhm.
Uh, and
Mm.
it's kind of a pun. Regina is queen and Catharum is harp, so the queen of harps. Uh,
Oh, Queen of Hearts, Queen of Harps, I got
yep,
you.
yep, yep. But it even goes further back. That was I wrote that years and years ago for my friend Regina, as a birthday present because it was one of those years I just didn't have any money. I'm just like, I couldn't buy you a present, so I wrote you a harp tune.
Matt, another, like, so relatable experience.
Yeah,
I bet every musician in the world hearing that story will smile and nod.
yep,
Like,
yep.
who hasn't been there?
So yes, I wrote that as a birthday present for a good friend of mine many years ago. So and she finally got to hear it on an album. She's like, "Oh, cool, about time."
Yeah, yeah.
But it
Oh, I
was
gotta say she got a good present. I love the
yeah,
tune.
yeah, yeah. That was fun. That was way back when I had this tiny little cheapy, like Pakistani rosewood harp too. I didn't even have a very nice harp at that point to play on. So
Oh, yeah.
being able to record it on my dusty strings was very satisfying.
Mhm. Now I won't tell her, but I'm just curious, like, musician to musician here. Was this the kind of thing where you've got a few tunes always kinda kicking around in the notebooks and stuff, and so you kinda dusted one off and put a name on it?
Uh,
Or was it more like you sat down thinking about her, and this is what came out of it?
it was more of the first. I think I had a couple. I tend to like when I have actual downtime, which happens less rarely than it or less often than I'd like. But I'll sit and noodle around and just kind of play and let my fingers wander and get these little fragments and kind of. And this happens with lyrics too. You get like a clever little line or turn of phrase, and you just kind of keep it in your notebook or your back pocket. And eventually, I should make something out of that one of these days. So
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
that little do 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 do, and I just like, oh man, I should finish this and make it a tune for somebody.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
it was like I had bits and fragments, and I kind of finished it to give to her as a gift. So it was based on some existing parts. So uh,
Yeah.
rummaging through the drawers and pulling out what I had to assemble something.
Totally understandable, yeah, and doesn't make the gift any the less special, nor the tune any the less enjoyable, of course, however they come about, and that's what matters,
Yeah.
why now, you mentioned that you're on your Dusty Strings nicer harp now, tell me about maybe take me back in time, like, why the harp at all? Where did that start?
Oh,
And maybe also talk to me about your current instrument, that'd be interesting to hear about
oh
too.
yeah, yeah. So I do play several different instruments.
Mhm.
The harp is one of them. also the Bower on the Irish drum, which was kind of my gateway to traditional music. Because I used to be a rock drummer, and I
Oh.
like, oh, here's this cool drum, and then I got into folk music and traditional music through that. Also guitar and mandolin. The harp, I uh, there's kind of a backstory to all of this actually. Although it's not like I had like, oh, there's not some great family tradition. It's really so I was going to college in the '90s, late '90s. Ran out of money. My family ran out of money, so I dropped out. Didn't know what to do with myself, so I went to go visit my friend in Dublin and hung around Ireland for a couple months.
Were
Like,
you over there for college already, or did you was this like a
no,
plane ticket,
it
the
was a plane
Troubles
it was
kind
a
of
plane ticket. This
I
is
shouldn't say the Troubles when talking about Ireland, I just meant like your personal, you dropped out of college and stuff, like I didn't mean like the Troubles, sorry.
it wasn't like '96, so that was right when that was all wrapping
Yeah,
up
right.
anyway. So yeah, so it's just like I was kind of at loose ends. I didn't know what to do, so I got a plane ticket to visit my friend and hung around Ireland for a couple months, as supporting myself as a street musician. While I was
Oh,
there,
that's gotta be a fun experience, wow, that's
yeah.
cool.
While I was there, I met this German girl in Galway, kind of hooked up with her, and we went to a music festival in France. Uh, and it's like
I love that you had a Galway gal, but she was German.
I know, right? It was a really still friends with her too. We're Facebook friends. Uh,
That's great.
but yeah. So we ended up going to a music festival in France, and while I was there, there
What
was
what kind of mu sorry to interrupt you, I'm
yeah.
just curious as we go along, what kind of music was your world at this point? Like, as a street musician, what kind of stuff were you playing, and then what kind of music festival did you guys go to?
So I was going to sessions at night playing Boweron in sessions, but like for
Mm.
busking, I was singing whatever I could with three chords and an acoustic guitar. So I was
Awesome.
never a really proficient guitar player. I'm still not, but
Mhm.
but I could sing pretty well. So I would just I'd bash out the few chords I knew and sing some traditional songs, some like rock and folk covers and stuff like that. But
Of
then I
course, I've only heard you singing on recordings, and
yeah yeah
so, like, I wouldn't know for sure, but you've got, like, a robust baritone sounding voice. I've gotta
yeah.
imagine it carries pretty well for and so as a street performer, that's probably gotta serve you well.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's I used to describe my singing as like, well, it's very loud and usually on key, and that's about enough. Uh,
That's something.
since then, I've actually taken some voice lessons and gotten a little bit improved. I'm still very loud, and I'm also a big
A
fellow.
little more often on key.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I'm a larger fellow too. I'm about
Mhm.
6'3" and kind of built like a ex
So
football player-ish build, even though I was actually a runner back in the day.
so you can amplify. You're
Yeah,
your own
yeah, yeah,
amplification
yeah.
system.
So which also leads to sometimes when people see me playing the harp in videos, uh, you know,
Oh, yeah.
they're like, "Oh," and they see it in person, like, "Oh, the harp's bigger than I thought it was." I'm like, "Yeah, that's because
It looks like a little lap harp
yeah,
when you hold
yeah,
it,
yeah,
hey?
yeah." So it's, I'm not, like, freakishly big, but I'm definitely on the taller end of normal.
Yeah, that's fun.
Um, but yeah, so yeah, I would be out, and street music, yeah, definitely teaches you that volume is very important. And
Yeah.
so I was that's when I was really just starting to get really heavy into the traditional folk and all that. And a lot of that going to sessions in Ireland helped a lot. But then the festival we went to in France was in Sault Chartier, and that was a lot of the French country dancing, the dances de ball.
Mm.
So a lot of like bourrées, mazurkas, waltzes, schottische, and the bourrée, mazurka, schottische, waltz. What was the other one? La Ride Zandros.
I'm pretty ignorant of all of this, but in general, I just have this impression, like, that's the fast, spinning, wild, fun stuff, right?
It can be, and it's a lot of like very like a lot of very straightforward like partner dances. A lot of them were not like super
Yeah.
complicated, which made it easy to like. Well, these were like what people would do in the evenings, and made it easy for you to find someone and start dancing with them, which was a lot of fun.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
but there was this week long festival, and it was there'd be like workshops and vendors and stuff, and concerts from like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Then at 10 p.m. there'd be these stages set up all over town where like these pickup bands would form with these sessions, and that would go to like 5 in the morning, and that's when the bakery would open, and you could grab fresh croissants on the way back to your tent, pass out for a couple
Oh,
hours, and
awesome.
do it all over again.
Do it again.
It's like, and even when you're like 22, your body can do that for like 5 days, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But it was a great 5 days. Uh, but
Were you making it okay? Have you got some French, or were you making it okay in English at a festival like that?
I had high school. French and a couple of semesters in college before I dropped out, and I had enough
Mhm.
to chat a little bit, and then be like, "By the way, I'm American, help." And, um,
Yeah.
which actually led to a really funny interaction in the line for the showers one morning at the festival. I was speaking to this couple because the lines were pretty long and in French, and we're conversing, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I have run out of French. Do you speak English at all?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we're from right outside London. We thought you were French."
Oh.
So like, "Oh, we consider
They
ourselves
might have been
naturalized."
running toward the end of their French as well
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
same
they
time,
were all,
huh?
um so I got by okay, but it was an international festival, so a lot of people spoke English pretty well.
Yeah.
And while I was there was this harp maker's booth, Artival harps from Scotland, and they had a couple little small harps and historical reproductions. I'm like, "Oh, these are cool." So I sat down at the Artival booth and I tried some out, and I realized that I really enjoyed playing the harp. It was just such a cool instrument, and also, the way it was laid out made more sense to me intuitively than, say, a guitar did. Um,
Mm.
so when I got back to the US, I saved up and bought, like, a cheapy little lap harp, and then a couple
Yeah.
years later, I got a little bit nicer one and, just kind of upgraded as I went, as I could afford to as well. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah, I think, yet another experience that I suspect is very relatable where
yeah,
we kind of, like, dump what money we can into an instrument, and then
yep,
that it's almost like that same amount of money stays there until we can add to it and dump
yeah,
more into the next iteration of that instrument, right? Just kinda keep
yep,
upgrading.
yep, and that's I know sometimes, more advanced players will kind of, like, very much look down on, like, the cheapy little, like the little Pakistani rosewood harps or the guitar-shaped
Mhm.
objects, they'll call it, like, these really inexpensive instruments, but they really do for a lot of people, that's their gateway, and they may not be great instruments, but they're what's kind of approachable, or achievable by people on a limited budget, and that'll get people into it, and then they're like, "Oh, now I need a real one."
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's lovely when you can have, like, I don't know, like a local harpers club or something like that,
Yeah.
some way to kind of like your learner harp can help somebody else get gatewayed into it too as you move on to
Yeah,
something else,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and harp is a little
There's
hard
a
to
so
play.
there's a place for simple little harps for
Yep,
sure.
yep, um, and I mean, even the cheapy ones are over $100, so that's like you can't pick it up like a ukulele
Right.
or something, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, with the economy of scale, it's not like you can actually get a pretty decent acoustic guitar for a couple $100 these days, but you
Mhm.
can't get a decent harp. I think some of the least expensive good ones are like the harpsicles by William Rees, and
Oh,
they're
yeah, I've seen those
yeah,
around, yeah.
they start at like $700 for something very simple,
Yeah, it seems
playable.
like they're, like, maybe the only game in town under $1,000, huh?
Yeah, they really are, and they are lovely instruments. Uh,
Mhm.
and I thought I would love to, when the budget allows, to get one as kind of a traveling harp because I started on a lap harp, it was great, and I moved up to the bigger harp, which I really enjoy, but also I don't take it places as much as I would if it were, just
Yeah,
a
that
little
makes
easier to
sense.
carry around.
Right.
But yeah,
And maybe less expensive too, so you weren't too stressed about accidentally dropping it or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the harps are very sturdily built because they're under a lot of attention, so they are like furniture. Uh,
Mm,
but it's
yeah.
like moving furniture. Uh,
Mm,
but also,
right.
but even a set of strings for them, like I think for the last string set I bought for my harp, which is 34 strings, ran almost $300.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
which fortunately I don't have to change them all the time because they are nylon instead of metal. But man, I definitely
And
put that off as long as I can.
are they nylon throughout? Because like, I'm not a harp player, so I've only ever been harp adjacent, but I understand that, like, sometimes people will make decisions about, like, having metal in some registers, nylon in
Yes,
others,
yes.
gut in others, that kinda thing?
Yeah, they're so with the Dusty Strings harps, you can get them in nylon or gut. And I think with the gut string sets, some will still be nylon and some will be metal wrap. So, but mine are the highest strings are single strand nylon. As you go down, they get thicker and thicker till at some point they change to wrapped nylon, like nylon wrapped
Mm.
around nylon. Then the lowest octave, the eight bass strings, are metal.
Ah, gotcha.
So those are always the ones that go out of tune first.
Of course they are.
'Cause the metal is more temperature sensitive,
Oh,
but
that makes sense.
but yeah, but so most of the strings out of the 34 strings, 26 of them are nylon.
Gotcha. Now, there's a tune on this album called Middlebrook,
Yes.
which honestly, the first couple times I listened to it, I thought it was called Middlebrook, and so I was thinking of, like, the middle of a stream or
Uh,
or a town maybe called Middlebrook or something like that. It wasn't until I read the description that you provided that you'd hit the middle page in your book, in middle book,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which I love the origin story for any tune name. You
Yep.
know, I know that sometimes they're inspired by something, sometimes it's a throwaway title, sometimes it's very almost utilitarian, you know? But I also, like I say, I'm very susceptible to the power of suggestion. I love that, like, the middle page of a notebook feels like such a liminal space, you know?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like this neither here nor there kinda thing, you know? It's right in the middle, and the tune feels so meditative. Is that on purpose? Is that just a happy accident, or is that just me reading too much into it?
It really was kind of a. I always thought of it as more, almost more of a meditation than a real tune. It's like there's not. It doesn't really go
Mhm,
anywhere.
mhm,
Like melodically, it's really just kind of a pattern that repeats itself. And like, so part of it, even when it was thinking about recording it, I'm like, is this even really a song, or is it just like this little thing I do? But
mm.
turned out a few people said that's their favorite on the album, though. I do think of it more as like a meditation uh,
Mm.
on the harp, and that, and it was, yeah. And still remember I had these little green and white music notebooks, and that was I would jot down little musical ideas and stuff, and that was, it was the middle pages where the staples show through, and all that. And so that's how
Yeah.
there is a place I think not too far from where I grew up in New Jersey called Middlebrook, which probably influenced my thinking, but like it's the middle of the book,
Mm.
the middle book. Yeah,
I like it.
yeah,
The music notebook that you were using, is that then, like, is it, like, page after page of just blank staff paper? Is that
yeah,
the kinda thing?
yeah. It was a little small, like maybe like A5 sized staff paper
Mm.
notebooks. I
I like that so much. I think
Yeah.
that's so cool.
I don't even remember where I got them because it was many, many years ago, but I can still, like, picture them in my mind.
Yeah. Has that remained your method? Like, a lot of musicians will just, like, use, like, a voice app on their phone or
Yeah.
something, you know, to capture those little snippets as they get ideas coming to them. Do you jot them down more typically?
I like to. I like writing stuff down. I like using my little pocket notebooks and stuff.
Yeah.
I think partially, like, by my day job for a lot of years was working as a newspaper reporter, so I, like, have a fascination with pocket notebooks and writing things
Mhm.
down professionally. Uh And
Yeah. No, that
definitely
makes
still
sense.
do, like, I definitely, like, when I travel places, if, like, I cannot turn down a cool little notebook, even though I have way too many cool little notebooks, but I do use a few of them to write down ideas. So, but
Yeah.
musically for me, I think, if I'm trying to remember it, if I take the time to parse it out and write it down in sheet music, it'll stick with me a little bit better sometimes. Um,
Mm.
I'm not, I can read music and I can sight read music very slowly and play along stuff, but I'm a not a really, really proficient music reader. So it makes me slow down and think about what I'm doing for a second because I'll have to sometimes sound it out really quick, which I think helps me retain it and gives me a little more time to think about it. It slows me down instead of just noodling away on
Mhm.
a riff.
No, that's very interesting because, like, I would have assumed that, a person drawn to, you know, jotting it down on paper, you know, would be a very fluent music reader, and so, you know, and your reason for it, your description of why you do it, definitely makes sense. It's just not what I would have assumed. That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, yeah, you would think. Uh, I just don't practice enough. I should be better at it. Um,
Well, whom among us does, right?
right, right, right. I did take music classes at community college for a while, and I had to pick an instrument, and they didn't have a Celtic harp program, so I used the mandolin, and
Mm,
took mandolin lessons because then I could do violin repertoire, and the teacher could actually judge what I was doing.
yeah,
Um,
right.
but I got pretty good at sight reading for treble clef. But I still stumble a lot in bass clef, which means my left hand parts on the harp are usually very improvisational.
Gotcha.
I'll even look at arrangements. I'm like, yeah, that looks like a C chord. Okay,
Looks like it, I'll go for it.
yeah, yeah. I'm not the best technical player of the harp, but
It takes all kinds,
yeah.
different approaches, and you make beautiful music, that's what matters.
Yeah, I always thought I'm a pretty good performer. I've got a good sense of melody and rhythm. I'm not. I don't.
Mm,
Harmony is probably my. I don't do like very complicated harmonies. But
mm,
also among harp players, for some reason, a lot of harpists don't sing while they play. It's a much less common thing. So
mhm.
being a singing harpist gives me a little bit of distinction there too, where like I'll play the harp and I'll sing a song. Um,
Yeah. The album itself, like, overall, you described it as a kind of brain dump.
yeah,
Um, do you feel like that's also what's going on with those notebooks when you put these like, o obviously, a part of what's going on when you put them down is solidifying what the lick is or what the tune what the melody line
yeah,
is,
yeah.
but do you feel like you gotta get it out of your brain to make room, like it's taking up space in the meantime until you get it out somewhere else?
Sometimes a little bit, and I mean some of the tunes on there, like what's it, Regina and Middlebook and Planxty Morton, uh,
Mm,
had been around for years and years and years, and I'd been playing them and all that. I just never put them down anywhere. Whereas a couple
mm,
others I'd written, almost immediately before I recorded it. I've got little bits and fragments. I don't. I'm a very slow songwriter and tune writer in that I don't finish stuff all the time. Uh,
mhm.
but a lot of stuff does rattle around in my head, and I'm trying to get better at like, especially for songwriting with lyrics and stuff. Like just like Matt, just finish the damn song. Doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's like you can have a perfect song or you have a finished one. Pick,
Right,
pick,
there that old "done is better than perfect" thing
yeah.
sure comes into play,
And
huh?
I've tried to now that the at the advanced age of 48, I'm trying to force myself to, like, just finish stuff, get it out in the world, and realize it's not that bad. Um, in the parts.
I appreciate that so much, though. I'm sure that I'm not the only I suspect this is one of those things that, like, we all do, but maybe a lot of us were doing it quietly, thinking we're the only ones,
Yeah,
feeling like I'm some kind of failure because I start so many things and don't finish them, you know? There can be a lot of negative self-talk around that, and it feels kinda like knowing that there's another musician in the world who
yeah.
has the same thing going on just kinda makes you go, "Oh, maybe this is normal."
And
Maybe I'm not uniquely broken.
right, and sometimes you listen to these songs, like, you listen through your favorite song, for example, and you might have 3 verses of brilliant lyrics, but maybe there's a clunky line that in there or 2 that you just kinda let slide because it doesn't matter. It's maybe that one
Mhm.
line's a little awkward or that one line's a little, like, "Oh, that rhyme's a little bit weird," whatever. But you still love the song, right? You don't be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that wasn't the way I would have phrased." And kind of realizing that maybe sometimes part of being a successful songwriter is just getting over yourself and,
Yeah.
being like, "It's a good song. It's not immaculate, but it's a good song. We'll get this out in the world and go." And, there might be and maybe I wasted a decade or more of my life not finishing songs that way because I was too afraid I didn't have it quite perfect, and yeah,
Mhm.
and I think I very much believe that other people do that too. So
Even if it's not the case, let's just assume it is, right? Because it frees ourselves up to do stuff, right?
I mean, we've all met other performing artists who are you can tell are very convinced that nothing they ever do is wrong.
It's true enough.
Maybe we've been
They
in
do
bands with
walk
those
amongst
people.
us,
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
they?
Yeah. Although I think that's, more of an exception than the rule. There's definitely people
Yeah,
who
yeah.
are convinced that they are perfect in everything they do, but I think for the majority of us, we're all a little bit like we see our flaws, at least in our performances and our technique, a lot closer than the rest of the world does. The rest of the world's like, "Yeah, that's
Mhm,
cool." It's like I have a daughter myself, and, although she's a bit older and is out of the house, and one of the conversation we had, she's like, you went through those self-conscious teenage years, like, "Oh, what do people think of me? What are people gonna think of me if I
mhm,
dress like this? What do people think of?" They're like, "The secret, kid, is people mostly don't think of you. Like, you're walking around in public,
mm,
they're not analyzing every detail of what you do. They're
mhm.
just kinda there." So, you get there's a lot of, that kind of self-effacingly to say about getting over myself, just like,
Mm,
and just being able to accept that, people are probably like, I am overthinking this way more than the rest of the world probably ever will about me. So
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom and freedom to be
yeah,
had from that line of thinking for sure. You mentioned Planxty Morton, or is it
yes,
Planxty Morton?
like Steve Morton. Uh,
Um, that's another one you said you had rattling around for a long time?
Rattler, yep, I've been playing that for a lot. And another one I wrote for a friend of mine who loaned me some money. I couldn't pay him back, so I wrote the song.
Another relatable
Yeah,
experience,
yeah,
I
yeah,
love
yeah,
this,
yeah.
man.
Morton being his last name, and Planxty being the word that O'Carolan, Turla O'Carolan, the harp composer from Ireland, would use for dedications of his
Ah, yeah.
songs. Like there's Planxty Irwin or Planxty this.
Hey friends, while we're listening to this cool tune, I'm going to try to do this in 30 seconds or less. I just want to let you know that I'm really grateful to Matt for coming on the show. I hope you're enjoying it. I realize Matt is not exactly a bagpiper, but it seemed bagpipe adjacent enough. I hope it's still enjoyable for the very bagpipey audience. And it's also partly for like another kind of side project that's very related, that this might end up being an episode on more than one show. I don't know for sure exactly how that's going to go or when it's going to happen, but I also want to give away a copy of Matt's awesome album. You should check it out. There'll be links in the show notes. We're going to roll the dice right quick and see who gets the copy. 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. MD Carbon, thank you so much for supporting the show. I'm going to get in touch with you real quick so you can get a copy of the album. If you want to support the show, you can go to Patreon. There are other ways you can support it too, but we're going to get back to the interview with Matt. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
I don't, as far as I know, nobody's quite sure what he meant by Planxty, but he would always use that when he dedicated a song to somebody. And then, of course, there was the band Planxty with Christy Moore and friends
Mm,
uh, back in the day, which was brilliant.
mm.
But yeah, so I'm saying all these things like, again, stressing I'm not a historian, and if I'm sure if I get it wrong, somebody will come on and comment on the podcast, be like, "No, that idiot." Which if that does happen, let me know, because that's how I learn stuff, just saying the wrong thing and being corrected.
Hey, it's a method. It works.
It's the best way to learn things on the internet is just say the wrong thing on purpose, I think, and somebody will
You'll
tell
get
you, like,
corrected pretty quick.
uh,
Well, what about percussion then? You say that's kind of, you came into this sort of like subgenre of music via the Bowron,
yes.
but you were an otherwise drummer previous to that. Take me back again. Tell me about your road on percussion.
Oh, yeah, that was, I went to a very small town elementary school, and the choices you had to play music were, like, when you got to, like, 4th, 5th grade or whatever, you start on the recorder, and which I hated. Uh,
Hmm.
it was terrible, but then you got to, time to choose your band instruments. You had a choice of, like, flute, saxophone, trumpet, drums, and maybe clarinet, I think. Like, there was no strings, there's
Hmm.
no keyboards or any of that because we just had such a small music department. So I'm like, "Well, I don't wanna play another wind instrument, so I guess I'll just do the drums."
The recorder had put you off of all the rest of them, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Although I occasionally pick up a penny whistle now, but
Yeah.
not as often, but yeah, so I got into the drums almost kinda like, it's like, "Yeah, that seems cool. I'll play the drums in school band." And then I realized that, like, I got into playing the drum kit and playing rock drums, and I found out in high
Mm.
school that, like, every band is looking for a drummer.
Yeah, they're like the goalies of the soccer or
Yeah,
of the hockey teams. Like you always need a drummer.
you do. So I played drums in a bunch of different bands and stuff in school and out of school, through high school and college, but then when I dropped out of college, I didn't have a band anymore 'cause, I wasn't around young people with leisure time.
Mhm.
Uh, so I realized,
Young people with access to their parents' garages, right?
yeah, that too.
The necessary elements.
Yep, and so I'm like, "Well, now I'm a drummer without a band. I guess I should learn to play enough guitar to sing to, because nobody's gonna wanna listen to a drummer without a band." At the same time, I was getting into the folk music and traditional music, and I discovered a friend of mine was a Bowron player, and so he showed me how to do it. I'm like, "Oh, this is cool too." And so I started
Yeah,
learning.
what was that like? Because like, my personal percussion experience goes from Bowron to other percussion, and so, like, I recognize that, like, it's kind of a weird drum,
It is, yeah.
but like, I'm relating to the rest of percussion via that experience, and so what's it like to be an otherwise percussionist and then seeing the Bowron for the first time?
I'll tell you one thing, being someone who used to play drum kit and then going to Bowron, it's a hell of a lot easier to carry.
Yeah.
Um,
Your gear cart suddenly
yeah,
disappears,
yeah,
huh?
it's
You
like,
just pick
oh,
it up.
well, that was part of what I liked about it. The whole thing about, the way you can change the pitch on it, and using that
Mm,
weird technique of playing, instead of right, left, playing down, up, and trying to
mm,
translate that. I thought was really fascinating, and the fact that you could kind of you couldn't make it sound like a whole drum set, but you could kind of evoke that a little bit with just your
Mhm.
bass and sharp tones and rim knocks and stuff, and get kind of that feel. That really fascinated me. The idea of like stripping the whole drum set down into this one instrument. Um,
Mhm.
and obviously in a traditional session, you're not playing it like a drum kit. Uh, well, at least not if unless you're really willing to endure dirty looks from the fiddle players. But
Yeah, I was gonna say, unless you if you wanna be invited back, at
yeah, yeah,
least you're not playing it like a full drum kit.
yeah, yeah. It depends on the session. I mean, some of the ones I've been to are a little more open minded than others, and I try to read the room.
Yeah, how is that, Matt? Because I'm not very well traveled, and so, like, I only have, like, where I live, it's kind of like sessions are kinda like, the more the merrier, please come, because like, it's like desperation to get people there,
Yeah.
but I've seen the signs hanging on pub walls that show a Bowron with a red X across it, like, "No Bowrons allowed," kind of
Oh,
thing,
I
like,
hate that
so
so
I
much.
understand that there's maybe some places where you wouldn't wanna go with a drum. What's up with that? What's going on there?
I think part of it, I think almost all of it comes from the idea that drums aren't real instruments and you don't have to take time to learn how to play them. You can just show up and play them, which leads some
Mm.
people to just be like, "Oh, well, I bought this drum in the gift shop, so I'm going to the session tonight." And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and it's a loud instrument, and it can be a loud instrument, and it's very easy when played badly to just suck the joy out of everybody else's experience.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I think,
So a few bad experiences like that, and everybody's like, "Never again."
yeah,
Put
yeah.
up the sign.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of those places, if you show up, if they know you or if you've played with some other musicians before, they'll make an exception for a Bowern player that they're used to or that they know
Mm,
is competent. But it's better to discourage people just to um, try to limit the number of obnoxious drummers. Some sessions are like that with guitars too. They don't like too many guitars or any at all because,
mm,
and it is, in traditional Irish music, it is really very, very much centered on the melody more than the accompaniment instruments. Um, So
sure,
that,
yeah.
that is part of the tradition. It's like, oh, mostly, at a session you might have, 12 people all just playing the same melody and no accompanists, and that's fine. Uh,
Yeah.
Whereas like, I think in like rock and blues and music, you tend to have a band of accompanists and one melody player. Um,
Right, right, everybody supporting the soloist,
right,
basically.
right. And I think people who don't quite understand this is one of the things like when I do teach Bowron, I do occasionally take on students and teach them the basics. It's one of the things I do is encourage them to also pick up a penny whistle.
Mm,
And, like, you don't have to be good at it or learn, like, a ton of tunes or become a virtuoso or ever play it in public, but I like to really be a good accompanist, you should at least be able to hear the tune from the melody side, if that makes sense.
mm. That totally makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that helps a lot, like, when you want to be the one Bowen player allowed in the room. If they if
Yeah.
if they know that, "Oh, yeah, you actually know how the tunes go." Uh,
Yeah, you wanna be the good one.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The one that's
yeah.
not a pariah.
Um, I, as someone who comes from the rhythm background, maybe occasionally think that some of the melody players would benefit from taking a little time playing rhythm too. I think it's definitely a value, and I've definitely worked with some players who are better at rhythm than others. Uh, I don't,
That makes
yeah,
sense. The kind of the cross training thing,
yeah,
like you say with the whistle, it's like no fiddle player or flute player or whatever it is needs to necessarily be like performance ready with
yeah,
percussion, but it might help inform their playing a bit if they did a little percussion
yeah.
study.
And they could kind of just help them feel the beat, which it is. A lot of the music has roots in dance music. It's still dance music, but even when people aren't dancing,
Mm,
just feeling getting the groove together. Uh, I don't know. I think
yeah.
it helps to cross train a little bit, but I definitely always encourage Bowen players to pick up a little bit of melody playing just to be able to kind of
Mm,
feel where it goes from. And I like to you'll hear some Bowen players say stuff like, "Well, I would never play on a tune that I don't really know completely by heart." I'm like, "Well,
mm,
I think sometimes that feels a little exaggerated. Like I don't have all the tunes I play memorized melody wise that I'll accompany, but I do like to be able to listen and feel the contour of the tune and which is,
yeah.
if I'm the only background player at a session and somebody starts a tune I'm not familiar with, a lot of times I will sit and kind of listen through the first repetition before I'll join in, just because I want to kind of get the feel for it and see if there are any surprises.
No, that totally makes
So,
sense.
so
Yeah.
it's like I might not be able to pick up the melody and play it right off the top of my head, but I try at least to like understand the tune.
Yeah. So
So
did getting familiar with Balron start before or after your Ireland trip?
Before I'd
Right.
played a bit in some bands and gone to a couple sessions, and then I went to Ireland and I got to play in a lot more sessions, and I would
Mm,
do the thing where I'd go, and I was a competent Balron player by the time I went. I had the percussion background and I'd been playing for a couple of years, but I would go like find a session with somebody who was like better than me and kind of sit next to them and play along or just listen and absorb for the evening as much as I could.
yeah.
And that was very
Mm.
helpful. Um,
Have you found, yourself, like, gravitating toward one specific stick or style of stick when it comes to the beaters? Or do you swap them out for different tunes? Or
uh,
just, like, when you're getting bored, just like, time for a different beater."
I've tried a
What's that
bunch
like for you?
over the years. I used to play a very, very like big, heavy one because I felt I could
Mm,
get a lot of momentum out of it, which I thought helped me. But lately, I changed. A few years ago, I decided I want. So I'd been playing the very kind of traditional, like wider, shallower rim Balron, the kind of old school Johnny Ringo type drum.
mhm.
Uh, then a few years ago, I'm like, I want to try out the newer style of Bowron, which the deeper shell and the narrower, the smaller drums with a deep shell. You get a lot more of the
Yeah,
pitch bending and all that is more pronounced. So I started
yeah.
playing that, and with that, I went to the bundle broad style of pit tipper more. Um,
Mm,
the little bamboo or the multi skewer type ones. Um, and I've
right.
been using those for the last like 2 years, pretty much exclusively. I've just gotten very
Mm,
comfortable with them. So I do tend to stick with the same style of tipper or stick for at least for years on end anyway. Uh, and I've even got a favorite brand and style of one uh, that I've got from Hedwishak in Germany. Um,
mm,
and I actually have quite a nice Hedwishak Bowron too that I did a little bit of promotion with him on. I've done a lot of stuff musically on TikTok, and so
mm.
in return for showing off his drum, I got a little bit of a nice discount on it. And yeah, so I've kind of fallen into this
What
very very modern style of playing lately, which I'm
when you're playing with those, the bundled, skewer style
yeah.
ones, do you keep them real tight, or do you loosen them up so they kinda, like, rattle a little bit?
I Actually what I've started doing lately is I've got two of the same one, and I've got one of them set almost rigid to the tip, like with a little rubber band rolled down all the way, and I've got the other one set
Mm,
at a point where it has more of the rattle to it, and I'll grab them
mm,
depending on songs. I have a few the same kind of weight and shape, but one of them is beechwood rods, and the other one is bamboo, which gives it a little more
mm,
brushy sound. And I tend to use the brushy
mm.
sounding one when I'm playing with a singer, and when I'm playing in a
Oh,
session, I might
gotcha.
use the hardwood ones a little bit more. Um,
Mm.
it's a small difference, and I might be the only one who hears it.
Yeah, right.
'Cause I do work in a band where I do a trio out of Philadelphia. We've kind of formed called Trianton, which is Irish for triangle because there's three of us
Mm.
that sit in a triangle, and the fiddle player's last name is Angle, so it's triangle. Uh,
Oh, perfect.
um,
Yeah.
it's me going back and forth between Bowron and guitar, a fiddle player, and then this woman Molly who sings and plays bass. And so me and Molly both do vocals, but with Molly's voice, I tend to use the bamboo tipper more. With my own voice, I
Mm.
use the beechwood one. Um, I don't.
It's the kind of thing, though, that, like, I suspect that there's a feeling
Yeah,
that's different for those of us who are listening that we maybe notice but don't know how to put our finger on where it's coming from. We maybe don't even notice, like, it's
yeah,
just a thing that's felt,
yeah,
but you know what's going on behind the scenes, you know?
yeah, yeah. It really is like, oh, this is a bamboo tipper song, or this is a the beech tipper song. Every now and then, I'll get out
Mm,
the hardwood or solid wood stick, but I use that a lot less often these days. But
mm,
yeah, there is a different feel for it, and I think I never really thought about trying to match the stick to the vocalist or to the fiddle before, but I guess I find
mm.
myself doing it unconsciously.
Oh, very interesting. Now it's been a minute since we heard a track, so let's just dive over to Rose on the
Oh, yeah,
Vine. I
yeah.
wanna hear some more of your music here. I appreciate here that, we've talked a lot about tune names already today, and so looking at this one, you mentioned describing this one, you say, "It's named for nothing in particular,
Yeah.
just sounded kinda stately, like something you might hear in a rose
Yep.
garden."
That was pretty much it. There was no deep thought behind it. It was just like, oh yeah, it sounds very,
Mm,
yeah, like I said, just very kind of stately and
yeah.
formalish.
Do you ever feel, any kind of anxiety about a tune, like, not being named? Like, do you feel like there's gotta be some kinda name thrown onto any string of notes, or do you feel like you can be pretty chill about a tune just sitting there unnamed for a long time?
I feel like it's not quite finished till it has a name.
Mm,
And I think I if I am superstitious about it or have a like a sentimental sense about it, is I might not give it a name till I feel like it's kind of where I want it to be.
oh, interesting. So it's like some tunes, whatever name will do,
Yeah.
but other tunes, it's gotta be the right name,
Yeah, and sometimes not
and
even,
so
yeah, yeah, even just giving it a name. Like this is this is
mhm.
this is the unnamed tune I'm working on, and I might even play it out at an open mic or something just to see, just to feel how it handles itself in public. But I won't.
Mm,
I'll, once I've given it a name, I feel like I'm less inclined to keep changing bits around.
mm,
Uh,
kinda solidifies it,
yeah,
huh?
yeah. So I think that's in a lot of cases like the last part of a songwriting process is giving it a name. Uh,
Mm,
if that makes kind of sense, where it's like it's still malleable until it's got a name. And once it's got a name,
yeah,
it's not. And there is a point, and something I've noticed more as I'm trying to do more songwriting is at some point it goes from feeling like this thing that I'm working on to a song that kind of exists on its own. Like,
yeah.
it's like I feel like, "Oh, I messed up the words in the song." It's like, "Well, it's my song, technically, I can't do it wrong, but I did it wrong because the song is its own thing now."
It has become its
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
And,
how
it's kind
interesting,
of
yeah.
it's kinda I'm not sure exactly when that happens, but something it definitely happens at some point, like, "Oh, this is that song." Um, and I'll almost hear myself recording of it and think of it as almost somebody else's song when I'm listening to it. I'm just like, "Ah, that's kind of a success."
Mm.
Like, it's become a real song instead of just a project of mine.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm not qualified really to talk about anything really. I'm not qualified for anything, Matt, but
Or on a
it does
podcast,
make me
right?
think about right, exactly. That's why I started a
Yeah.
podcast.
We'd
Exactly.
be on TV if
But
we knew what we were talking about. No, that's not true.
that's right, yeah. But, it does make me think about, like, it doesn't seem like an uncommon at all, feature to have in societies throughout time and around the world to have some kind of naming, ceremony for humans,
Right.
where it's like there's something about personhood that goes along with having a name,
Yeah.
you know? And, like, there's something about, like, this song baby of yours, like, becoming a
Right,
real
right.
thing, it gets a name that it makes sense, it feels
Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah. That's so
I also love I love any kind of, like, mythology story where, like, if you can figure out the fairy's
Yep,
name,
yep,
then you have control over
yep,
it in a way, like
yeah.
Rumpelstiltskin and the like,
Yeah, which I feel
so
like
fun.
was weirdly prescient about the information age that we're in now, where it's like if people could figure out maybe not your legal name, but your various identifying account names and passwords and all that, they can control a lot of your life, a lot more than you'd like sometimes. So
Wow, I'd
there's
never
kind of
thought of
that
that.
that prescient thing, like, oh, actually, that's not that much different from the idea that people can get power over you if they know your true name. Now it's your social security number and your
Wow,
your
yeah.
bank number.
This is like that Solomonic magic about if you know the demon's
Yeah.
name, then you can tell it what
Yep.
to do. Come it's all here.
It's
It's all still
the
here.
the the internet is weirdly
Wow. How interesting.
mythological if you look at it in the well, if you're weird enough to look at it that way.
I like
But,
that.
you know,
I am weird enough to look at it
I
that
mean,
way, Matt, and I appreciate you pointing me
I'm
to
some
it.
weirdo from New Jersey who plays the harp, so
So we should be
we're
listening
just
to you. That's what that
that's my next career choice. I wanna be the ornamental hermit in some rich guy's garden that just dispenses wisdom. Just grow my beard out.
Oh, dreaming of the spiritual guide hermit
Yeah.
life, man. I hear
I'm
you.
just gonna sit on the porch of my cottage with my harp and a mug of tea and deliver cryptic wisdom to people who
Just
walk by.
ready. Well, speaking of, like, sitting outside, playing
Oh, no, I
harp and
lost
stuff like
you.
that, like, I do get the impression that you're an outdoors kinda person. What is there anything behind what you used for the album cover? The painting of a bird on
Yeah,
a
yeah.
leaf, I think is what's going on,
A
or a
little
bird on a stick?
chickadee sitting on a branch. I am a kind of an outdoorsy person.
Yeah.
I used to work in bicycle shops. I hike and I try to run, not very quickly these days, but I do spend a lot of time outdoors. And during the shutdown portion of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time watching the birds in the backyard because there's nothing else to do and all my
Mm.
gigs were canceled.
Another relatable
Yeah, yeah.
experience, Matt. You're just the most relatable musician. I love this. Yeah.
We've all got so much in common, I think. But yeah, so I started dabbling
Yeah.
in sketching and painting the local birds and stuff. So there was the
Mm.
black-capped chickadees in the backyard were some of my favorites, just because they are these tiny, tiny little things. They're like a half-ounce bird with like 5 pounds of attitude,
Yep,
and so
yep.
they're just some of my favorites when I think about like small musics, and that these were all like the whole what's the Kale Beg versus Kale Moore type tradition in a lot of the Irish.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. Light music and
yeah,
heavy
yeah,
music or
yeah,
something along
and
those lines?
so these are all very like short little informal tunes. I thought so they were definitely the small music, the Kale Beg, and
Ah, small
so I started
musics,
thinking about
yeah.
small musics, and the little small songbirds, and it just kind of again just a little
Mm.
free association in my head, and so
I
I
love
painted
that.
that, and yeah, because I can't afford professional.
And I love the painting too. That's
Yeah.
lovely. That's a great painting.
If you look at the Dead Lovers album, which I uh, was my other one that I released a couple years ago, that was an
Yeah.
illustration by my daughter, who is also a bit of an artist.
Oh, was
Yeah,
it? That's
so
great. It looked like is it crayon
it was
or
done
oils or something like
in
that? Something
markers,
that
like
oh, in
yes,
markers,
yes,
huh?
and that
Gotcha.
one you'll see there's actually a werewolf off in the background, which is based on
I
so
wondered what that was.
it's a joke I've been making for years about these. There's all these songs about like my true love went out on the moors and she died, or my true love died. Sometimes they say it was the English or a fever or something, but a lot of times it's unexplained. So I started joking that if in a folk song, one's true love has mysteriously died, just assume it was werewolves.
This is the common theme
That's
connecting
the
all of those
illustrated.
tunes. It was a
Yeah, yeah,
werewolf.
yeah. So that's the DeBlass theory of folk song fatality. Is if they don't otherwise explain how they died, just assume it was werewolves.
That's the fallback. That makes that album
Yeah.
even better. That's perfect. So now speaking of, like, being outdoors, small things, I don't know, that feels like a perfect draw toward the last tune of the album, um, the Honeybee
Yes.
Waltz, which you mention here that you wrote this while sitting on a porch watching bees, and I just think, "Oh, here we are, full circle,
Back
back
on
to the porch." Was that intentional to open and close with porch
um
tunes?
yes, there were also the two of the newest ones on there too. So they were
Uh,
both written while I was living in that one house with the porch,
yeah.
and I went from grasshoppers to bees. So yeah, it was
Mm.
kind of a bit of a circling back to where I was at that point when I was recording that album, and yeah, it was watching the bees out in the yard, and uh, one of the places I would play frequently in Madison was at a mead hall too,
Mm.
honey wine, and so honeybees were definitely a theme.